The occurrence boarder came out of the warp at the coordinates where waystation Elementum Octavus was supposed to be found, and found the station to be missing. In its place, there was a pitched space battle being fought between an Imperial vessel and an unidentifiable Xenos ship. A quick inspection of the system turned up the missing station farther back in its orbit of the local star than it should have been. In fact, a quick scan revealed that it wasn't in an orbit at all. It was moving in a nice straight line right down the gravity well. The captain estimated it had passed the point of no return about 4 hours ago and would start burning in about 30. He refused to speculate on what sort of weapon or magic could just cancel an entire station's orbital velocity. As for the ships, our initial instinct to go help the Imperial vessel was quelled by the captain. He reminded everyone that the only way the occurrence boarder would win a naval engagement was if the other ship spontaneously exploded before it fired its first broadside. If it exploded afterward, the fight would probably be a draw. Furthermore, the ship was looking less and less like it needed our help the longer we looked at it. It was definitely a lot bigger than its opponent, and was throwing out a staggering amount of firepower. Sure, it seemed to be missing the smaller ship with every shot, but nothing the Xenos was throwing out made it past their void shields, and it was squawking stuff like 101001101 for chaos 10100111010 across all Vox channels, and the astropath refused to tell anyone what he was hearing. The tech priest on duty on the bridge had immediately declared them to be heretics, then had left his post to go talk to the other cogboys. No one bothered to stop him. It was really looking like our best option was to just jump right back out of the system and head somewhere less creepy. That's certainly what the captain recommended anyway. Except there was the tempting little matter of the station. It was the only thing in the system those ships could possibly be fighting over, and neither was in a position to stop us from taking a quick look. It was a stupid idea, and it's a miracle we survived. The captain had stubbornly refused to get any closer to either the station or the fighting ships than necessary. The occurrence boarder was positioned at nearly the maximum distance from the station its shuttles could travel, and sat there with its engines and warp drive spun up. In the captain's words, "If anyone even looks at me funny, I'm leaving all you stupid bastards to die." With those encouraging words ringing in our ears, everyone boarded their shuttles and went to see what was so special about the waystation Elementum Octavus. It says something about how distracted everyone was that we were cruising for about a quarter of an hour before we realized Jim was the one flying and Hannah was the co-pilot. The reunion was sort of spoiled by the little note taped to the cockpit door saying, "The shuttle is monitored, talk and move as little as possible, wait for us to give the word." After a long and awkward wait, Jim finally came back and announced that he'd looped something or other and we could talk. Hannah refused to leave the cockpit, even though we promised Tink wouldn't do anything weird. Amy opened the conversation with a polite, "What the hell is going on here, you metal bastard?" but relented when Sarge vouched for Jim as the broest of cogbros. The explanation that followed was quick, obviously well-rehearsed, and fairly terrifying. The gist of it was that the ship's tech priests weren't just antsy. They were on the edge of mutiny. Jim hadn't seen the actual data they'd pulled out of the Majos, but whatever this piece of archaeotech was, it had practically driven his seniors to a schism. Some of the cogboys wanted the tech destroyed, others wanted it locked away, and a few wanted to study it. The only thing that prevented an immediate free-for-all was the fact that the thing wasn't here, and that the Majos had reported it to someone named Joris. The senior tech priests had eventually agreed to wait for Juris to decide and abide by his decision. Unless, that is, it looked like the Archaeotech might fall into someone else's hands. Like, say, the Inquisition's. Less holy men, such as us or Jim, might see the ship's senior tech priests as arrogant, socially stunted, and quite possibly insane. But they were not stupid. They knew we'd keep chasing the Archaeotech and would allow us to continue, for now, but were monitoring all the team's shuttles and comms. If any of us found information relating to the Archaeotech or its location, we'd be given a single chance to turn it over. If we refused, Jim and the tech priests piloting the other shuttles had orders to cut our comms and return to the ship, leaving all three teams to cook on the falling station. In his words, the Magos Juris must decide this matter. Anything else would result in a schism. When the Mechanicus schisms, Titans walk and worlds burn. My superiors will see you all dead before they allow that. After everyone had digested this speech for a while, Nubby put on his weaseliest smile and asked Jim if he'd really do that to his old pals. The flat look he got back from the engine seer was incredibly worrying, especially coupled with how Jim turned around and went back into the cockpit without saying anything else. So anyway, that's why, when we finally reached the station, our team decided to stay in the shuttle while the others went ahead. They could probably handle anything in there without us. Sarge loudly announced to the other teams that he intended to do visual inspection of the station. You know, for space stuff. The other interrogators agreed it was a good idea, but none of us thought of it as anything more than an excuse to not get marooned on a rapidly falling chunk of metal by crazy cogboys. So it was quite a surprise when we cleared a corner and saw the Heretech shuttle already docked to the station. We managed to call in the sighting just in time to keep the other teams from blundering into a bunch of heavily armed servitors and a tentacly tech priest. According to Battleaxe and Sword Guy, the Heretech seemed to be searching for something, stopping and doing creepy stuff to every cogitator or comm terminal he encountered. They decided that following the search party and seeing what it turned up was the best use of their time, and switched their teams to stealth mode. We wished them luck and continued our inspection. Now this is where some less imaginative people would have blown up the docked shuttle, but we were suspicious bastards. Sure enough, a little more searching turned up nearly a dozen more shuttles, all of them heavily armed but dormant for now. In our professional opinions, 12-3 wasn't good odds, even without factoring in how much better armed they were than us. So Sarge decided to let the sleeping shuttles lie and called in a warning to the ground teams, advising them not to engage. Battleaxe interrupted and asked him to repeat the message. It was hard to hear over all the shooting. Luckily, Sarge's facepalm turned out to be premature. Neither ground team was actually involved in the battle, they were just watching as some third party shot 7 types of hell out of the patrol. The question of who the Heretechs were fighting was answered by the sight of a familiar laser cannon beam stabbing out the station's hull a short distance away. Amy summed up everyone's opinion of this development with an incredible streak of swearing. Different people are curious about different things. Sword Guy was wondering what sort of convoluted plot the Eldar were running. Battleaxe was curious about what the Heretech were looking for in the cogitators. Our team didn't worry about that sort of complex bullshit. We just wanted to know how the Eldar had gotten onto the station, because we sure as hell didn't see any other shuttles out here. Thanks to the Adepts, we all knew the pointy-eared bastards liked to use fancy hidden teleporting web dealies to get around. but that's not the sort of thing you find tucked into the corner of a human waystation. Either their teleporters had range from where their ship was duking it out with the Heretics, which Jim claimed was incredibly unlikely, or someone was trying to be sneaky. Guardsmen don't like it when other people are sneaky. It typically ends with us getting shot in the back. So we decided to take a harder look at the station. Since we didn't want to alert anyone to our presence out here, our moderately untrustworthy pilots did what they called a passive scan. We understood this to be the equivalent of looking real hard at something but not going so far as to throw a rock at it to check for mines. Unfortunately, while it didn't blow our cover, it also didn't turn up anything. Sarge was debating ordering some figurative rock throwing when Tink announced that it was time to use some real scanners built by real scientists. Jim hastily leaned out and tapped his "You are being monitored" sign before Tink finished pulling off Spot's skulls. There was an awkward sort of pantomimed argument in which Jim managed to convey that he couldn't turn the cameras off again, and Tink managed to convey that Jim was a colossal metal asshole. In the end, Tink wound up putting on his void helmet and stepping out the lock with his drone before pulling off its disguise. Since no one had anything better to do, we all clustered around the little airlock window and tried to watch over Tink's shoulder. It wasn't very interesting. All we could see was him poking at his Xenos data slate and muttering to himself. The real action was happening down below us, where the drone engaged its stealth field and started taking some very close looks at the station and shuttles. Whether it was due to Tink having a bit of experience looking for Eldar with his drone, or pure dumb luck, or because Tau Drone Tech was really just that good, he found a shuttle that was not like the others in just under 5 minutes. This did not please Jim, who had to endure Tink making faces at him through the cockpit window as he relayed the drone's data. What appeared to be a fairly standard, if gruesomely decorated, Imperial-style shuttle to our eyes looked like a bat-winged Xenos craft to Spot the Wonder Drone. It had sharp, forward-swept wings with odd chunks missing, and these weird, mandible-looking wings under the cockpit. But that wasn't what really caught our attention. What really caught our attention was the 2 massive laser cannons slung under it. This thing didn't just have our shuttle's little wing turrets outclassed. It had us completely outschooled. Tink very carefully parked his drone above the Xenos shuttle, and a quick debate over what to do about it was held. It says something about how shaken we were by Jim's little warning that we went with Nubby's idea. So no shit, there we were. Hovering over a camouflaged Xenos attack shuttle, carrying more firepower than any 3 of our birds, and instead of running away or trying to destroy it before it realized we were there, we were trying to figure out how to steal it. The long warp voyage out to this backwater sector must have rotted our brains. Quite aside from how stupidly dangerous an idea this was, it had absolutely nothing to do with why we'd come out here in the first place. In the station below us, the other 2 teams had just engaged the Heretech forces in an effort to take a captive and figure out what the hell they were doing here. In space above us, 2 incredibly dangerous ships were locked in a brutal dogfight while our own, completely combat-incapable ship nervously watched from the sidelines. Somewhere across the Immaterium, an unknown archaeotech device was cutting a swath of destruction towards Imperial space. And yet, our primary concern was nicking this fancy-looking Xenos shuttle, possibly while its owners were busy shooting up our companions. Truly, we were the pinnacle of inquisitorial professionalism. It really wasn't our fault, though. The tech priests were obviously to blame. If they hadn't been plotting to maroon us in space, we wouldn't have felt nearly so motivated to acquire an alternate means of transportation. When you combine that sort of threat with the opportunity offered by an incredibly valuable unattended vehicle, heretical Xenotech though it may be, it's entirely unreasonable to expect a poor guardsman to resist temptation. Secure in the knowledge that our behavior was completely and totally justifiable, we prepped for our breaching tools and formed up in our shuttle's airlock. Twitch provided some cutting charges, which were carefully placed using the drone's little servo arm. When everything was in place, Jim, who'd eventually stopped trying to convince us to do something saner, flew us as close as he could without alarming any hostile shuttles. A trio of his little skulls were deployed and leashed like sled dogs. Then, he departed and left us drifting in space above the holographically disguised shuttle. All things considered, it was a very good thing that Twitch was up to date on his meds, and Fumbles wasn't feeling particularly nervous. The skulls hauled us across the gap as, just outside of our line of sight, the charges went off, and the shuttle's bay depressurized. As the last breath of air leaked out, our 5-man, 1-woman team zipped in. We crossed into the grav field and landed inside the shuttle with weapons ready, just like the trained professionals we supposedly were. Well, at least 5 of us did. Whether it was due to her injured hand or because she wasn't used to performing these sorts of shenanigans, Amy missed her mark and wound up caroming off the hull. Everyone turned to watch as she spun off into space, swearing a blue streak as the skulls raced out to catch her. All of us were so distracted that we were nearly pushed out after her when a gust of wind suddenly hit us in the back. Our squad turned around expecting to see, then shoot, some effeminate Xenos. Instead, a pair of big scarecrow-looking things with fish-shaped heads were standing there staring at us. At least we thought they were staring at us. The damn things didn't have eyes. Their weapons were certainly pointed our way, though, which was what really mattered. Now, fighting in a vacuum is odd. Nothing sounds right. You can feel and sort of hear your weapons firing through your arms, but the shots don't make a sound. It's amazing how much you rely on little audio cues in a battle. It was hard as hell to tell how many shots we were firing, and even harder to tell if they were hitting. Oddly, it was almost as if we'd lost exactly 10% of our ballistics skills due to the unfamiliar terrain. We coped, though, and poured a torrent of laser and plasma fire into the 2 hostiles. Surprisingly, the fish-headed Xenos didn't seem too bothered by our barrage. They just soaked our fire and slowly tracked their weapons onto us. Then everything went funny. Not ha-ha funny, rather, whoa, I can taste the color purple with my ears funny. As the feeling washed over us, we scattered, and a pair of large orbs appeared. One orb formed right between Twitch and Sarge, while the other appeared above the now prone form of Nubby. For a split second, we could hear something beyond understanding, but not horror, in the spheres. Then, with a pop that could somehow be heard through the vacuum, the orbs disappeared and took 2 perfectly circular chunks of bulkhead with them. We all just stood there and stared for a second. Then Fumbles started screaming. None of us had liked what we'd seen when the Xenos had fired their weapons. Whatever those things did looked a lot worse than just getting shot. But Fumbles had a stronger reaction than the rest of us. The little psycher's screaming ratcheted up to a shriek, then kept going until it started bouncing around inside our heads. Now, there are several relatively normal things that are a bad idea to do in a void suit. Vomiting traditionally heads this list, followed by crying, sneezing, and a few other things depending on whether your model has waste disposal systems. Anyway, if someone ever revises that list, using a psychic shriek could probably be added somewhere near the top. Now, not being a psyker, I can't properly say whether it was a matter of the shout building up inside his helmet until something gave, or if it just punched through his faceplate on the way out towards its target. Either way, we all felt a wave of panic roll over us as the shriek was cut off by what sounded like a burst of wind. A helmet's worth of air and a hail of plastic slammed into the two Xenos monstrosities along with the psychic attack, where their combined force did exactly jack shit. Fumbles landed on his ass, frantically clawing at his ruined helmet and radiating pants-wetting terror to the entire squad. Unlike our past experience with the Psyker's aura, this wasn't distracting, annoying, or disturbing. This was incapacitating. By all rights, we should have died right there, stumbling around in an attempt to escape a sourceless fear. But two things saved us. The first thing was Twitch, who shrugged off the aura of fear like it was nothing. He sprinted across the room to Fumbles, pulling off his explosives-filled pack on the way. He jammed the bag over the Psyker's head and pulled its drawstrings, causing the bag to inflate like an incredibly dangerous balloon. The aura of terror reduced in intensity as Fumbles' inability to draw a breath was reduced by claustrophobic darkness, and the fact that someone was partially strangling him. The second thing was that the fish-headed Xenos were some sort of retarded. One of them fired a shot at Twitch as the trooper sprinted across the bay and missed by a scarily small margin. The other casually walked up the open hole in the bay and just sort of vacantly stared out of it. It didn't stop to shoot anyone on the way, or even try to step on Nubby, who was lying half a meter from where it stopped. It was definitely one of the more bizarre things we'd seen on a battlefield. Or, it would have been if we'd been in any condition to see anything. As the aura faded and we acclimated to the unusual feeling of someone else's terror raging through our minds, everyone got to their feet. We were greeted by the sight of one Xenos reading his insanity orb cannon for another shot, and the other spacing out at the edge of the hole we'd entered through. This is where your normal group of heroic badasses would have opened fire in an effort to kill the Xenos before they could fire again. We didn't even try that. See, our attacks, plasma and hotshot lasgun alike, hadn't so much as phased these assholes. It was time to try something new. Sarge shouted his orders and threw himself at the Xenos' cannon, grabbing onto it like a big disgruntled monkey hanging from a branch. To Sarge's dismay, the fish head turned out to be more than strong enough to hold up both him and the weapon. Luckily, the way Sarge was flailing around completely spoiled the Xenos' aim, and the next hell orb appeared in the middle of the bay's floor. While Sarge kept his target off our backs, the rest of us turned to the one near the hole. Tink and Twitch stepped backwards, lowered their heads, and charged straight at the Xenos' back. Down on the floor, Nubby hastily crawled towards the hostile, then flipped onto his back. At this point, the fish head seemed to remember that it was in the middle of a battle and started to turn to face us. He wasn't fast enough, though. Two charging guardsmen hit the Xenos in the side at the same moment as a pair of augmetic legs launched upwards. As body checks went, they weren't the best. Both soldiers were on the wiry side, and the best word to describe the Xenos' size and weight is hulking. Combined with the lifting force of Nubby's legs, though, it was just enough. In a sort of slow-motion ballet, the fish head tumbled forwards, right out the hole we'd blasted into the bay's wall. Amy was being hauled back towards the shuttle by Jim's Skulls and Spot, who she was riding like some sort of demented horse. As she neared the hole, something big and rather confusing looking launched out of it, causing her to swear and nearly fall off her mount. After she regained her composure, she watched as the thing tumbled into the void, slowly spinning as it drifted away. When it didn't do anything, she dismissed it as not her problem and raised her new rifle as the shuttle's interior finally came into view. Back inside the bay, the Xenos had gotten tired of Sarge dangling off its weapon. It grabbed one of the struggling non-com's arms in a dinner plate-sized hand and inexorably pried him off of its weapon. Sarge found himself suspended in the air, or vacuum as it were, facing away from the angry Xenos. He flailed as hard as he could in an attempt to break its grip, and failed miserably. Sarge then grabbed his slung laser gun and tried to fire it over his shoulder. It was wrenched from his hand before he got more than a single burst off. Finally, in desperation, he reached for his grenades, which were pretty high on the list of stupid weapons to use in a vacuum. Perhaps luckily he wasn't able to grab one before his free arm was grabbed by the Xenos' other hand. It raised him in the air, then slowly, inexorably began to spread its arms, and by extension Sarge's, apart. The first thing Amy saw as she rose over the edge of the hole was Fumbles, sitting there and clawing at the backpack full of high explosives tied over his head. This was odd, but not an immediate problem. The second thing, or things, were 3 of her squad mates running around like idiots and screaming about not being able to get a clear shot. The third thing was her new boss being pulled apart like a wishbone by a 3-meter-tall Xenos. Amy sighted her rifle, waited a beat for Sarge's legs to swing out of the way, then put a burst of plasma right through the monstrosity's shoulders. In a perfect universe, the fish head's arm would have fallen off, and Sarge would have beat it around the head and neck with its own severed limb. Unfortunately, in our reality, the arm just went limp while the hand still retained its vice-like grip on Sarge's. Also, both of Sarge's shoulders were dislocated, and he was too busy screaming to beat anyone around the anything. We tried not to let our disappointment show as Sarge merely flopped to the side and left us a clear shot at the Xenos. 3 hotshot laser guns, a plasma gun, and a pulse rifle poured precision fire into the Xenos' thin middle section. The combined weight of fire did what our earlier barrages couldn't, and with a soundless snap, the bastard collapsed in 2 separate pieces. Sarge swore loudly as he landed and informed everyone that the Xenos' grip was not getting any looser. Since the fish head seemed rather hard to kill, most things lose their spunk after being cut in half, you know. Everyone stepped forward and concentrated their fire on its shoulders. That finally did the trick, and we pulled Sarge free. Took a while to pry the severed arms off of his wrists, though. Talk about a death grip. We all stood there, contemplating our success and wondering what to do about Sarge's shoulders, when Fumbles finally caught our attention. His comm wasn't functional and we couldn't hear him, but he managed to send a rough psychic message out. He was wondering if the fight was over and we could go somewhere with air now. The bag was nice and all, but he was pretty sure at least one of the mines in there was armed. Twitch winced, then he and Tink got to work on the door that the 2 fish heads had come through. They had to push the Xenos' severed torso out of the way to get access. It didn't do anything when Tink kicked it, but it somehow managed to glare reproachfully despite not having eyes, or any real face for that matter. While the more technical side of the team got the door open, Jim's Metaskull floated in and took a look at Sarge. It sort of poked around in a confused manner, trying to figure out how to get at Sarge's shoulders. After a while, its little machine spirit must have reached a decision, because it deployed a syringe and tried to jab Sarge with it. The puncture-proof void suit turned out to be stronger than the skull expected. After a bit of straining, it broke the needle and whacked into Sarge's shoulder, triggering an impressive amount of cursing. The Metaskull got even more agitated at this failure and deployed its little circular saw, the one we had last seen it use to decapitate the Magos. None of us really knew if it had decided to harvest Sarge's head or just wanted to cut through his void suit while he was in a vacuum, so it could deliver its painkiller shot. Either way, Nubby and Amy fended the skull off with the butts of their weapons until the door was finally opened. Jim was very apologetic about the whole thing, but we still didn't let the skull follow us into the pressurized section of the shuttle.